Hi, friends. Welcome back to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and we're continuing this meaningful season featuring our newest class of Lock Innovative Leaders. These leaders are stretching the church's imagination, not simply by launching new programs, but by rethinking how faith communities participate in the flourishing of their cities. And I'm grateful to be joined again by my co-host, Dr. Kuecker. Aaron serves as CEO of Hope Chicago, an economic mobility initiative working to remove barriers to post-secondary success for 2 generations of families. Across his leadership, including his time in higher education, Aaron has consistently asked how institutions can redesign systems to expand access, dignity, and long-term opportunity. Aaron, it is always good to be in conversation with you.
Thanks, Lisa. The same is true for me.
So much of your work centers on economic mobility and institutional innovation. When you think about the role of the church in shaping the economic life of a community, what feels most urgent to you right now?
That's a really big question. I think I've come to believe that our imaginations are sort of profoundly shaped or bounded by the way we hold on to our money. The way we use our money is the way that we think about our relatedness to one another. And so one thing I think that feels so important and opportune for the church in this moment is to create a different kind of imagination about our relationships, and then to wonder how the money could flow differently, how the economics could flow differently. But that's hard work because we're in deep ruts with how that goes. But what a vital witness that could be if we would begin to see our neighbors in ways that moved our resources in profoundly more generous ways.
Yeah, that's so good. Those deep ruts are reinforced by our reward systems, right?
Yeah,
and make it hard for us to ask new questions when we benefit from those. Some of us benefit from those ruts. And these themes of, economic imagination, if you will, and relationships and faithful presence, I think are very prevalent in our conversation with our guest today. So we're honored to welcome Reverend Matt St. Pierre, who is the executive director and co-founder of Restore Merced in California's Central Valley. Matt has spent more than a decade investing in one neighborhood, building a ministry that weaves together entrepreneurship, reconciliation, and spiritual formation. Through Restore Merced, he has launched social enterprises that create meaningful employment for individuals often labeled hard to hire, restoring dignity through work and cultivating long-term pathways toward stability and belonging. You'll hear him talk about those themes. Matt holds an MDiv from Western Theological Seminary and is ordained in the Reformed Church in America. His work is deeply theological, deeply relational, and deeply rooted in place. He lives in the very neighborhood he serves. So, Aaron, before we listen to the conversation, I'd love to hear what stood out to you.
Lisa, do you remember like a few years back when it was kind of cool to make those word clouds that showed in the cloud?
Wait, it's not still cool?
I'm worried. It might not be, but maybe it is. If we did a word cloud of Reverend Matt St. Pierre, I think the word gift would be so large right in the middle. I was so struck by the way he sees gift at the center of his work. And the way that he describes his positioning as a neighbor for the community of Merced, not as a gift he's bringing primarily, but actually as a gift he's receiving. And it was all rooted right there for him.
Yeah. He kept talking about the gifts he's receiving, the gifts he's seeing. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me that I wrote down was when he said, it's really all about formation rather than service. And I thought, wow, if we could all sort of show up in the world that way, in other words, being a listener, a learner, constantly showing up with a sort of theological and relational humility, if you will, so that we might be formed, rather than thinking that what we have is what you need. Anyway, that kind of humility of place and the role of being formed
Yeah.
feels important. So let's listen to our conversation with Reverend Matt St. Pierre. Hi, Matt. Thank you for being with us today.
It's great to be with you, Lisa. Thanks.
All right, we're going to jump in. I'm so excited about this conversation. We want to hear more about Restore Merced and would love for you to share some of the path that has led you to founding it and to the work that you're doing, maybe some key moments along the way that have shaped this sense of call and particularly the intersection of your faith call and this work and community transformation that you're doing.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it's always interesting for me to reflect back on things that I wasn't even aware of, at the time that I believe were kind of ways that God was intervening in my life and leading me to, piecing everything together to kind of bring me to where I am here today and the journey that God has Restore Merced on as well. But as I look back, there were some, moments where I would say it kind of began with this personal questioning and really trying to dig into understanding of you know what is it that God invites us to when Jesus offers us abundant life, like what does that look like and how does that impact like every area or every sector of our lives. And even when I was first maybe engaging some of those questions, I would say it was during college. I didn't always have a context to put things I was reading about in the scriptures with a lot of what I had been given, kind of this picture of this very individualistic, spiritual, life only relationship with God, and particularly all that I was seeing in the scriptures about God's identification with those on the margins and the ways that God was kind of inviting us to a life of grace, but also how works mattered as well, and the ways we engage the world and the neighbors mattered as well. So I was kind of wrestling with some of those questions, and right around that time, I got the opportunity to go spend a summer with some family members who lived in a neighborhood in kind of northwest St. Louis, Missouri, and they were part of a church community there. Who, in ways I had never seen before, were really embodying and practicing kind of this life together. And living out teachings like trying to live out teachings like Jesus's Sermon on the Mount and the things that I didn't really have a category yet or understand where they fit into my own personal faith. And I got to spend that summer, being a crew leader for a youth job training program for teenagers in their neighborhood. One of many ways that this church community was bringing practical expressions of good news in their neighborhood with their neighbors. And in a great way, that experience really kind of messed me up to show me that there is a different way to think about how we live out our faith, especially just here in our own backyard, here in the US, and and that was the beginning, I think, of this journey where I started to become aware of leaders, Christians who for decades or even over the whole history of the church had actually been engaging in these kind of whole person, all of creation type ways with their faith. And I started kind of drinking up everything I could by them. Leaders like, of course, modern day heroes of mine like John Perkins or others that were a part of the Christian community development movement, and getting this new context for just what might it look like to be God's people in ways that our communities need it, in ways that we need to be actually receiving the fullness of abundant life that Jesus offers us. And then from there, it was really just I guess, a story of God kind of bringing the right people along at the right time to get a more clear, full picture of how God was inviting me into that specifically.
Great.
Matt, I love the energy that comes out of you as you begin to describe that sense of call. That's really fun to watch. You have an MDiv and you're ordained and you're an entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur. How and when did you begin to sense that gift in you and then understand that it was so vital for gospel work?
Mhm. Well, it's funny. I don't even know if I've ever used the word entrepreneur to describe myself, but there is this draw, I think, to um, to be able to reimagine how things could be, and how communities, how people, how our experiences could look different than just what we've been given or what we've known. As you look at what God's kingdom looks like and how that's described in the scriptures, I think I think it invites us to imagine the world that looks very different than all the ways that we, have experienced and have seen just kind of brokenness and suffering, and really kind of put ourselves in a box of what we even think is possible for the flourishing and thriving of people and communities. And I in theory, I was trained by studying business in my undergraduate. I can't say that I maybe paid as close of attention as I could have and benefited from that and been more set up for a life of trying to start social enterprises to provide work opportunities. But I would say that even in that, I think um, the idea of kind of imagining different kinds of opportunities or a different way of life. It was clear to me that it is going to involve starting something before others can maybe see that that is possible or the validity of that. And so I think the vision is what has always kind of carried me forward into being willing to take a risk or take the next step. And then it's just a matter of talking to the right people. I've learned so much from other people who have gone before, and even this growing area of what they call, ESCs, or employment social enterprises, businesses that exist to provide opportunities for people who are, often excluded from them. And so I just have found that when you are motivated to try to do something and step into what you see as an opportunity to create new opportunities, people who are passionate about that will happily kind of give all sorts of wisdom and direction that they've learned along the way. And so I've really just benefited, I think, largely from others. And then I can't say that I loved every step of the process. I never had to set up and run payroll, or I wasn't really ever a bookkeeper before. But when I could see the end that those activities are serving, it feels so worth it to learn whatever you need to be able to really create a structure that provides opportunities for people to thrive.
I want to jump in there and hear more about Restore Merced. You've used language like abundant life and the whole life of a person. And Restore Merced is specifically focused on what some have labeled hard to hire, and you focused on meaningful employment. And so can you connect those dots for us? How does meaningful employment bring someone to sort of wholeness of life and abundant life and dignity and some of those things? Connect those dots for us. And feel free to talk more about what Restore Merced does specifically, especially if I've gotten it wrong.
Yeah. Well, I would happily kind of share in the simplest way what Restore Merced is today. Most truly is an employment social enterprise. So we are a business that exists to provide employment opportunities for people who have barriers to employment. And for us, that's usually defined as, formerly incarcerated, have experienced homelessness, are in recovery from substance dependency. Those often all three of those things might be something somebody brings with them. But we look to create opportunities with no barriers for someone to step into and begin to, kind of have, in many ways, their dignity affirmed in ways that they might not already be aware of it themselves, by contributing, by seeing that they have gifts, they have skills, they have things to offer others. And work is one of the primary ways that we kind of get to express that and do that. And so that's a really important piece of who we are. But we're equally at the same time at Restore Merced a Christ-centered community. So we believe that the opportunities to thrive and to flourish, whether it's in work or it's in our education or other areas of life, all have to come from a community of belonging that's built around kind of what we believe the body of Christ is meant to be and meant to look like. And so from the beginning, we've kind of been focused on what it looks like to be, each of those things. And that has driven us and kind of helped us take the shape that we find ourselves in today. So what we try to offer people at Restore Merced is a community of belonging, a place that from day one, they can recognize that they both have something to gain and something to offer for the good of others in that community. And so why work is such an important and central part of what we do is it's often how we help someone begin to see things that they can't even often yet see about themselves, that they are, of course, we use the language of the psalmist, wonderfully made, that they have been crafted with all this care and intention, and they have these great things inside of them to offer for the good of others. But we kind of get to try to call those out and name those in people before they're able to see them, just because of ways that, maybe they've internalized other messages throughout their life that have kind of given them a different view of themselves. But what we've seen is, as folks begin to express some of those gifts through their work, they begin to actually even work well with and become a part of this team where you start to see them develop good relationships with others that maybe they haven't really had, in a long time, of feeling like they're really for people and these people that they're working with are for them as well. They start to see themselves in a different light. I think it slowly over time begin to imagine like that maybe they could do things that they hadn't previously thought. And all of that starts to inform for them, I think, that they're just, the foundation of it all is their belovedness, that God created them in love, that God has never stopped seeing them in the fullness of who they were made to be and their potential. And it kind of is been amazing to me how work can be that starting point for that, where so many other much deeper truths and relational realities can kind of form around that. And there's this ripple effect of where you just start to see people as a whole person, move towards thriving.
Nice. Thank you.
That is amazing. Can you, so I'm thinking about the way that, Christian communities do a lot of really important work that provides sort of downstream, more immediate need solutions, feeding someone who's hungry in the moment, providing housing for someone who's unhoused. And those downstream solutions are, of course, so we need them so badly. You're talking about some upstream solutions, it strikes me, both with regard to like welcoming people into meaningful work and all that provides, but also as you were speaking, I think helping people see their belovedness in the way that you just so movely described. It's a massive upstream solution. Like how for you, Matt, like in spaces where churches and nonprofits are often thinking about that sort of short term, what often feels like emergency relief. It's so important. I'm not making a value statement here, but how did you learn to think further upstream about that kind of transformational engagement? And what does that require of your community?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's probably a couple of answers to it. One is that I think I've myself been wired towards having kind of a relational curiosity. I just like getting to know the people that I'm around. And so even as when I was starting to see maybe some of these aspects of God's heart and identification with folks on the margins in college, and I started trying to find, well, where can I go, show up and where these things can be expressed, whether it's, kind of in a shelter environment or feeding program or some of those kinds of opportunities. I always found that I wanted to get to know somebody, there. I wanted to try to hear someone's story, share my story, feel like there was a relationship formed that, beyond just kind of the actions of service that were a part of those experiences. And then, those may carried me into a couple very significant relationships with people that I got to know during college that I would say had a major impact on me and even shaping some of my understanding of what it meant for me to try to build relationships across some of the barriers that were there, kind of socioeconomic and just life experiences that look different from one another. And then I think that there was a theology that I was given to kind of understand some of that drive where I wanted to say, okay, yeah, this is so important for this person's immediate need to be met today. But also I wanted to know, well, what does God have to say about them experiencing abundant life, right? What does God have to say? What is God's vision for the future of this person's life? And that's where I love, and I go back so often to Isaiah 61, right? The same passage that Jesus reads from when in Luke 4, and he announces the beginning of his public ministry. And he announces, how he's come to proclaim and bring good news to all of these groups, right, on the margins and those who are really kind of cast off by society. And then it goes on in Isaiah 61 and talking about those groups to say they will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord to display his splendor. They will rebuild ruined cities and repair, streets that have long been devastated. And so I think getting to understand that God's vision for those who maybe today need their kind of immediate needs of food and shelter and clothing met is not just that those needs would be met, but that they would be able to become leaders, pictures of strength and oak that God uses to bring his kingdom. And it's so consistent with the ways that God works through the scriptures, right? Always choosing kind of the unlikely or those who have clear and obvious, downsides or flaws, like all of us. And then works in a way that those individuals could never accomplish on their own for the good of others. And so I think it was starting to see that pattern of God working in people that really made me hungry to say, well, how can we have this longer term relationship, a place, a space that where people can continue taking those steps from instability to stability in life, and then be the ones who are now kind of pouring back into the community and helping others who are in a similar situation, maybe as where they once were.
I'm struck by this phrase you used of relational curiosity and what that has led to in your life in terms of coming alongside folks. And so I'd love for you to play with that a little bit, because you live in the neighborhood you serve. You're not coming in and saying, "Here, I'm here to serve you." You're coming in as a neighbor, really, and you've now invested over a decade in Merced, and so I'm curious about what it has meant to be a neighbor. How has proximity shaped your leadership and your understanding of the call for your ministry, and what does that longtime presence allow? And maybe what's hard about that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, in many ways, it originated, the idea of becoming a neighbor originated with ways that I've learned from a number of those leaders that I shared about, earlier, who have gone before and kind of developed these models that they might call, incarnational, or, the idea that the 3 R's that John Perkins first, used as a way to describe what Christian community development looks like. But then I think over time, it's taken a different shape and meaning for me of what is the gift of getting to be a part of this neighborhood or this community. I mean, I have this tendency that I think is in most of us as human beings to not necessarily want to run towards and embrace things that are uncomfortable or that are painful.
Uh-huh.
And so they're very easily, it's so easy to get sucked into these other stories about the world and about life, of what the good life looks like, and what could be true for me and for my family, if we were to pursue kind of those as our main hopes or ideals. And I think that proximity and being close to neighbors who maybe have a different life reality or don't have maybe the same option right now to kind of, move out of this area or pursue, life in it, that has nice vacations, or that has, like a certain kind of just access to finer amenities or things like that in life. It has kept me grounded in asking a question of what is life really about? Like, what is the goodness that God offers us? And clearly I could say, if someone asked me, is it in nice vacations or a nice home, or, these other things, or is it in relationships? I would choose the relationships, but it's still so easy to live in a way that doesn't stay connected to that. And I think the physical proximity has kept that kind of in front of me and my family in ways that it wouldn't be otherwise, that it would be really easy to kind of tune out that reality for a longer period of time. But I've also come to see it as not just, okay, this is, I don't necessarily interpret it as this is a sacrifice that our family is making to live here. I actually see, and the only way that it's really sustainable, I think, is that it's really a gift of grace that we get to be where we are. And starting to look at our really all of life through that lens of like as being a gift, a gift that that we get to have the neighbors that we do, a gift that we even have this space to call our home that we live in, and the ways we get to develop community with others through that. I think that helps it not feel like it's a burden or not feel like it's a weight, but really it's just saying, okay, what is the gift God is offering us today as we get to live here and be in this place and call it home? And of course, our desires for the neighborhood are the things that we care about, and what kind of shapes the way we engage in Merced in a more broad way are very much shaped by the place that we live and where we call home. And I'd call that all a gift as well, to be able to see what is actually good for the whole community, and how can we, adopt policies and things that would help the majority of our neighbors to thrive. But I think it's become a gift for us more than anything to get to say this is where we call home, and it's helped us just, I think, develop in that authentic relationships with neighbors that don't feel like they have any other point to them, but to get to know and to care for one another.
I'm going to jump in with a follow-up here, because I feel like you would really have a unique perspective that I think is important for the church here. We often talk with folks about how the neighborhood is the unit of change, and that is not a message to the church to sort of abdicate responsibility for its role, but actually to step into it, to really stand to its full height. And in this moment, the voice of the church is needed. And so then it might change the question from how do we serve our neighbors to how do we be a neighbor? And so I'm wondering, as you think about what that has meant for you as an individual, your family, and the giftedness of it that you have experienced, but also the kind of call and responsibility and sort of the deep gospel call of it. How might you speak to churches about that and what it means to stand to their full height in the neighborhood, and what kind of, not to feed you my own perspective, but what kind of humility is required in that, and what does collaboration and partnership look like? What would you say to churches about this, their role in the neighborhood?
That's a great question. In fact, it's funny, this afternoon, I'll be meeting with a local pastor of a church, and a lot of this is at the center of some of what we'll be discussing and talking about. But one of the ideas that I've been playing around with and thinking about more deeply is, of course, we get a number of times, we'll have churches or individuals reach out to us that want to get involved somehow, right? They want to volunteer. They want to somehow engage in the work that Restore Merced is doing. And I've been thinking about this idea of volunteering through the lens of formation versus through the lens of service. Yes. And I think that what we would hope to even be able to offer kind of the local church here in Merced is to understand that the gift comes from viewing, getting involved or stepping out into your community, volunteering, view it through the lens of formation. That this is about, how is God wanting to meet me as I step out and get to know a neighbor or move outside of kind of an area or a space that I feel comfortable in. It's less about what can I bring and more about what can I learn, right? It's less about what am I going to do, and more about me learning to look for where is God moving and God already at work here. How do I learn how to identify the signs of God's kingdom that's happening in the smallest ways that are so easy to miss, just in passing through or having a quick conversation with somebody. And really, I think that is where, for me, it has become this reality of I feel like all the time I think of what a privilege it is to have the relationships that I have, like to know some of the folks that I know who have had a major impact on my life that has just come from seeking to kind of follow this call where God tells us where we'll find him at work, right? Where he is among those who are hurting, those with, who are pushed to the margins. And yet it's not so that we can come and solve all of the issues. It's actually so that we can continue to experience the fullness of abundant life ourselves and to do that together with others where I think we do recognize that reality that everyone has something to offer and everyone has something to gain. And we've tried to build the Restore Merced community like around that principle. And like I said, there are things that from the moment someone comes into our work program that we seek to practically give them that experience of you have something to offer. And also, of course, you're here to grow and learn just as all of us are. But I think you can take that out into a broader view too. And through like all of Merced, you mentioned the word humility, like for all of us to have that humility and coming to work with other organizations, churches, city and government officials, local businesses, and individual neighbors. And just to see that as truly being the case that everyone has something to bring to the table. Everyone's welcome at the table, right? In the kingdom of God. And everyone is going to become more fully themselves as they offer their gifts and receive from the gifts of others. And so I think I'm really passionate about the local church really kind of taking that on as an approach and entering in with that expectation that we're going to be changed for the better as a result of this. Are we going to have things to offer at times that come from our own skills and our own lived experiences? Absolutely. But we should always be looking through kind of both of those lenses, or we're going to miss, I think, what God is really inviting us into.
Yeah. Yeah. For real.
Matt, I want to sort of pull on that thread about seeing the kingdom of God in the tiniest of spaces. And I want to do it by asking you like a forward-looking question, but I'm just going to like put a little frame on the front of it. The forward-looking question is, when you think down the road 10 years or 15 years and you think about what you're hoping, said, I want you to talk about that. But, questions like that can sometimes be rooted in like a deficit mindset. And I don't think we mean that. And so I actually want to ask you first to talk about what you love about Merced. And what you hope is more true yet in a decade and a half.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of things that I love. It's interesting too to be in a place that you also grew up in because you have a very I have a very kind of um, deep history with this place. And of course, there were things growing up I did not appreciate about the community. And like many people, probably especially from smaller communities like this, desired and saw myself leaving and not returning. But I think in coming back, what I have been able to appreciate is one, there's a connectedness here in Merced, like in the size community that we're in some of the history. If I compare it to the time I spent in San Francisco, right, a lot larger city, it is so much easier here to bring different people kind of together to the table for a common purpose and to really try to discuss like what is best for our overall community. And I love that. There is just in having a couple conversations and prompting people, you can really get the ball rolling on something that can lead to significant impact and change. And that has been a gift to me to be able to see how God has done that in our time here in Merced so far. I think that there are all kinds of, I've called in many ways, this move to Merced from San Francisco felt like a move into obscurity, but in a good way. I think that, our lives were not meant to be lived kind of all out for display or in public like they so often are through social media, through, all of the kind of other things that we are aware of that are happening all out there and around the world, but we're really meant to be lived in close community with neighbors. And to me, what I've gotten to experience personally in Merced is to see how there are people who the world will never hear about, who are not doing anything particularly, amazing, but who are just living these very faithful lives for the good of their neighbors. And that is all they're really expecting of life, rather than, it being this grander, picture that I think it's so easy to get caught up in, thinking that everything we do is supposed to be on this large scale or have some kind of massive impact. So that has been a gift. And if I think about what I hope is true in 10 to 15 years from now, here, it's that those folks are the ones leading Restore Merced, are the ones who are starting. They're some of the most creative and resilient people that I have ever met. And so the hope is to get to see them fully exercising those gifts as they continue to lead, actually be the leaders of Merced and for the good of this community, because I think their experiences, their life experiences, their knowledge, and their humility is kind of what's needed to be able to create the kind of community where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and flourish.
May it be so. May it be so. Yeah. So one of the things about the Locke Innovative Leader Award is that it often, as we highlight these leaders like you, folks can look in and go, oh my gosh, that's incredible ministry. And they sort of imagine in their minds a trajectory that's sort of up and to the right. And the reality is there's a lot of bumps along the way, and there's some fits and starts, and there's some decision points and some pivots. And one of those recently, I think for y'all, is that you felt called to this farming ministry. I'm going to call it that. You might describe it differently as, something that you all might invest in and might become maybe a new pillar for you all. And then you did some discernment and you've handed it off to another organization. Now, I've given it in a nutshell, but I'd love to hear a little bit. And particularly, I'd love for you to talk a minute about the decision to move away from something you felt like was really important and what that was like. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think from the get-go, vision has always been something that's been very central to Restore Merced and how we've tried to make decisions about, what's our next kind of, initiative, or what do we feel like we should try. And there's been a willingness to try things that we didn't know from the beginning if they would work or not work,
Which is part of it, right?
It's
great.
Part of it. And I think it always has to be, there has to be that risk-taking piece. And I think that's just innate in the work. I probably actually would say is innate in the Christian life, right? That we're not supposed to be able to accomplish everything on our own that we need. We can't, actually, is the story, right? But the move towards weakness and embracing weakness is really important. And I think that does go along with risk-taking, and for us, we've often asked the question since we started. We live in a very agricultural area. That's our largest economy here in the center of California, and farming is a major part of who we are and the identity of this place. And so we've often had asked the question, like, is there a way that work should be more central in what we do? I mean, connecting with and working alongside kind of the local ag industry, what could that look like? How could we maybe be preparing people who are interested in careers in agriculture or are going to end up in that space? How can we provide some tools so that they have the opportunity to enter into upwardly mobile kinds of jobs in the ag industry? But then also just loving that idea of, again, our folks that we work with being able to show the giftedness that they have and what they have to offer. And what better ways to do that than to grow food for your community that others can enjoy, right? So many good things that I think led us into feeling like, yeah, that is a path that we should pursue and see what happens there. And we had good buy-in too from partners in the area, a lot of good responses to the vision for what we called Restore Farms. And we, began kind of trying our hand at farming, fresh market farming, which is a whole different thing. I grew up actually personally in agriculture, but I did not grow fresh market produce. We grew things that were predominantly used as feed for livestock. And that's a very different world than growing, your fresh vegetables. And so there was a lot. We knew there was going to be a high learning curve. We knew that it was going to really be dependent on finding the right person who could come in and run the day-to-day of the farming work and kind of oversee and train the folks that we sent out there to work alongside. And for 2 years, we really put everything we had into this idea and trying to develop it. And it really culminated with some of the vision coming to fruition. This last year, we had a CSA, or Customer Supported Agriculture Produce Box subscription program, where we had 80 people from the community that were getting a box of produce every other week from our farm.
Wow.
And there was a good response. That was part of the vision too, is how can we engage more of our broader community with the story of what God is doing at Restore Merced, and bringing in this kind of customer base was one of the things we were excited about with that, and being able to share and tell the story. But what we found over time is this. There's a great quote. I don't know who to attribute this to, but it's, if you want a small fortune, start with a large fortune and then start a small farm. And so that reality of seeing how complex of a business model for this very small farm, it required, we kind of were able to reflect and recognize, the complex part of our work is really focusing on the people and the growth trajectory of people from that place of instability to stability. We need the business operations of the jobs that we provide to really be as simple as possible.
Mm.
We actually were able to kind of hone in on what is the best work we can offer, or the best kinds of jobs we can create. And we decided it is work that we know we can do as well or better than anyone else is currently doing it. And farming is not one of those things. We weren't the experts in that we kind of needed to be. But then it provided an opportunity to get to work with one of our local partners that we work closely with is the community college. And in fact, we had started an apprenticeship program with the state of California, where we were providing the on-the-job training on our farm for people. And then they were going through this ag tech certificate that the college was offering,
Nice.
kind of with this classroom learning, and to get more familiar with the growing face of technology and agriculture, as that's more and more the future of where it's headed. And so as we got this apprenticeship program, and it was approved by the state of California, that opened up these grant opportunities for the implementation of it. And we decided, for all the reasons I just said, I don't think that we should continue to operate the farm. It's going to kind of drain all the time that we have to really pour into the people and into the community and what's at the center. But why don't we offer to our partners at the college this grant opportunity so that they can grow this ag tech program that they've been developing, and potentially, in talking to them, discover that they could also offer our people hands-on work experience on their farm as well. And so the feeling as the smaller, kind of nonprofit, to offer this larger, institution, this grant that could help them build out what they were doing in kind of a same type space as us. It's just one of those, I think, learning lessons of, okay, maybe the vision had to be there and we had to go down this road to learn the things that we learned through this process. We don't think any of us regret any of it. Even the relationships formed from offering food to our community and the people who came through Restore Merced that got to work out there over the last couple of years on the farm. But it doesn't mean we have to be the person that carries it forward through every other season. And I think that's been really helpful for us to recognize that, to say we don't regret it. We're willing to take other risks as they come, but we actually have a much clearer picture of what those risks probably should look like, so that they fall in line with what it feels like, God has gifted us for and resourced us for, so that we can continue to kind of expand on that and deepen that, rather than spread ourselves too thin in a way that everything else kind of suffers for it.
That is such a perfect case study, really tip to tip, from the discernment of, we're going to try this because it feels aligned with what it is we're trying to do with with folks, and this notion of risk taking is embracing weakness, and when the vision is big enough that you need God for it, and then moving into it, and really having some wins, and still discerning that it wasn't the right long-term path for you all. I mean, that is just a really nice case study. I appreciate your sharing that with us. it's time for us to wrap up. And so I want to ask you the final question that we're asking all our guests this season, which is, as you reflect on your own leadership journey, what inner work, so think spiritual practices, habits, core convictions, what inner work has mattered most for you in sustaining you for this work that you're doing, this ministry?
I love that question. That's probably at the center of some of what I feel most passionate about, even what is my main contribution to the Restore Merced community at this stage, but is to focus on the health of the inner life, and for me, my own journey, I think was interesting in this, and that I kind of, like I mentioned earlier, came out of, the traditions where maybe the focus was just on individualistic relationship with God, spiritual life, as being kind of all there was to the Christian faith, to then having my eyes open to this cosmic kingdom that Jesus is coming to restore and renew all things. And there's nothing, that won't ultimately be healed under the reign of Christ. And so I'd say for quite a while, in a good way, that vision drove me in my work, but it almost became kind of the main way that I understood my spiritual life was through how is the kingdom coming out and around me. And then I got the chance to do a sabbatical at the 7-year mark of Restore Merced. And one of the things that the spiritual director and counselor that I got to work with during that, pointed out to me as I was sharing some of those realizations of how I started thinking of it as a kingdom coming, all around me, was, well, what if what God's wanting to do is continue to see the kingdom expanded into the poor parts that are still inside of you, and bringing healing and wholeness to all that is a part of your own story. And that was so important. I've gone back to that many times, but is this recognition that, gosh, this work is not something I can accomplish on my own, and I've known that all along, and in order to really continue to be someone who offers and brings good to others, it is so important to be aware of what the pain I still carry is, the ways, why do I have some of the habits I have? Why do I have some of the responses I have to things? And so some of that focus on my inner life has, I think, become really pivotal in even offering a healthy community for people to join, offering a healthy workplace at Restore Merced for others to find not just meaningful work for themselves as they join us, but healing within themselves as well on their own journey towards the wholeness that Christ offers us. And so counseling and spiritual direction have been really helpful for me. I've also really come to love a lot of the kind of Ignatian practices and found a lot of help. And we try to institute some rhythms at Restore Merced for the whole staff, because we really want to always believe that this is God's work. We're simply joining in, and God goes before us. So we keep rhythms of Sabbath. That's one of our core values built in. Every quarter, we do quarterly days of prayer and reflection for the whole staff team to kind of reflect on where, even those questions of where have you experienced consolation, desolation in the last, quarter? Where do you find God kind of inviting you to greater wholeness? And just taking that moment to say, this is your work for today, pause and do this. And I love those days. I look forward to them personally. And I think trying to bring that culture here into Restore Merced has been important. Annual days of silence and solitude, 24-hour silence and solitude retreat is another really important practice that we try to institute personally and for our entire team here at Restore Merced as well. And then just looking at how, of course, those rhythms are built into weekly and daily life too. But I really feel like the work of, joining God in the work of the kingdom and the work of formation is just two sides of the same coin. And I know that has to remain a priority for me, or I really don't have anything good to offer others.
Yeah. I so appreciate how this has come full circle. You started with talking about this being drawn toward the abundant life and human beings having the wholeness of life. And And here you are talking about how, that's not just for other people, that's for you. That's for the team that you get to work with. And that, it just feels like full circle. I so appreciate that you are living inside yourself what it is you hope God is bringing about, and you're seeing God bring about around you. And that feels really important for how you show up. I appreciate you, Matt. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you, Lisa. It was great to get to talk with you all.